This instalment of BM Wednesdays was recorded live at West Surrey Racing's headquarters for BMW Car Club members on the 30th of March 2022.
Good evening. Hello, welcome to BM Wednesdays. I'm Will Beaumont. You join me for a very special episode. We are behind the roller shutter doors in the workshop of probably one of British Touring Car's most successful teams in its history, West Surrey Racing. It's not just going to be me poking around under the bonnets and under the wheel arches of cars. We've got some people who actually know what they're talking about. We have the team manager, we have Carl Mitchell, we have Sophie Ball, who is the #1 mechanic on Colin Turkington's car, and we have Ryan Allison, who is #1 mechanic on Jake Hill's car. So before we get stuck into everything, as always, please ask some questions. There will be the chat, which will be kind of around somewhere within Zoom. So put your questions in there, get them in early so that whoever, or the clever people behind the scenes can send them to me so I can then read them out. And when we get to a relevant point, in white, so the car that comes from BMW, we've got one that's not been touched, it's straight from the factory. So it's just over here. So we call it body in white, but it's not white. It's sort of this kind of beigey khaki colour sort of thing.
It's in primer at the moment. So this is how we get the race car from BMW, essentially. It is just BMW 3 Series G20 road car. This is exactly how it arrives. You can see we're just storing it at the moment. This will eventually become chassis 7. So we'd like to have a spare shell ready just in case. Every now and then, you never know when you might need a shell last minute, or one that's already sort of halfway built, so that we can, get it ready to go racing at short notice if we ever had a major issue with any of our current race shells. So yeah, no, this is exactly as it comes off the production line. We have to do quite a few modifications to get it ready to go racing. So, for example, everything forward of the front bulkhead will be cut off. The car will be completely debracketed. All the soundproofing will come out to make it lighter as well. The car then gets some sort of excess glue that you might see from the assembly on the production line, and that will all be removed. And then it will go to Willie Poole Motorsport. He's our fabricator, if you like, for the team. And then we get a custom roll cage fitted. So that's signed off by Motorsport UK, and that'll be the same for all of our shells. So yeah, that's sort of where the process will begin for us. And then when it's finished, it's not too far off what this car here would look like.
So I was just going to interrupt and say we've got a bit of a technical hitch. We've got no video at the moment, so everyone can hear you, hopefully, and that won't have completely gone to waste. But we'll just sort of like have a pause to sort of, get the video rolling and make sure that we're all back up to speed there so people can see it. But I suppose if we can be heard rather than being sort of seen at the moment.
Yep.
So none of these shells there's nothing special about the shell. It's not come from BMW Motorsport anyway. This is just off the production line as it is. And you say that that it's inspected sort of throughout the process by.
Yeah, so all the cars have to be homologated. So yeah, this is a perfectly normal road car, no special edition like you may have had back in the day with some race teams. It is literally as it would be if it was going to be built into a G23 series.
Okay.
TOCA, the championship coordinators, if you like, organisers, their technical team will come and visit us here at base. They also look at all of our CAD drawings before the car gets signed off, and they will stay on site with Willie Poole while the shell is being fabricated.
Okay.
So they're measuring and checking all the technical dimensions, if you like, just making sure that everyone's playing by the rules. We all go to the same location for the same wind tunnel for the same aero tests. So the rear wing position is sort of equalised across the board. So no, they do keep a close eye on it, and if anyone was doing anything they shouldn't be or cheating effectively, it would be found out quite early in the process.
Okay, so in terms of sort of when you say that they sort of look at these cars, they're looking at certain aspects of it. I mean, from a point of view of kind of a layman specifically, what could they create that would sort of give you an advantage from this early on
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at track width or wheelbase, for example, there's certain dimensions that we have to keep on the car, or have to work within a limit. If we were to start adjusting the wheelbase, track width, or make a slightly shorter car, there could be advantages there. Materials as well. Materials is a big thing. So if we started replacing some of the panels with something a lot lighter, and then try to hide that further down the line, I don't think we'd get away with it. We found that quite quickly. But that's another example of what could be done if you lighten the car to the point where it was just going to sort of crumple to try and save some additional weight. So yeah, there's a few sort of trick things that teams have done. Not saying in a British Touring Car Championship, but motorsport as a whole, you are obviously trying to push the boundaries.
Yes,
and
of course.
You know, there's plenty of teams out there within motorsport that have come up with some really great interpretations of the rules, if you like, and have gone on to win championships because they found a loophole effectively. And yeah, you know, that is part of the sport, is trying to find those loopholes or trying to push the boundaries. And obviously, if you push it too far, you know you're going to get caught, or if you are blatantly ignoring the rules, you know, you effectively will be disqualified from the championship. So yeah, it's definitely a case of you need to stick to the regulations, otherwise there won't be any benefits further down the line. But
you're monitored very early on, it seems, from these sort of things. So there isn't to an extent the interpretation of the rules that you might want to be able to kind of to focus on that sort of stuff. You've not necessarily got that same ability.
Yeah, and I think even if you were to interpret the rules in a different way, I think TOCA would pick up on it quite quickly. And that discussion as to whether your interpretation is right or wrong would be had quite quickly and quite early on in the process. So I don't think you're going to go the whole way through the championship with something hidden. You'd have to have something embedded quite deeply.
Because obviously secrecy is a really big point about this. And throughout this evening, we're going to get a really special look into lots of these cars, and we'll see things that, you know, that certainly from a point of view that I've never seen. It's really interesting, but there's also a lot of secrecy when it comes to setup and those sort of things. So we won't be able to sort of like completely sort of like jam the camera right under the bonnet or under the wheel arches, because that will reveal some things that you guys don't want to reveal to the rest of the world. So there will be an element of, we're not going to be able to sort of like fully look at absolutely everything, but you'll get a very good idea about what goes into these cars, what's sort of like what makes them up, and what makes them, you know, what makes them British touring cars to an extent. And so just while we've got the video back and we're back up and running, and so let's have a quick look at sort of like this car as it is now.
So, yeah, the bulkhead that you see on the car there, basically anything further forward than that gets cut off completely. We have championship supplied subframes. They all bolt in on the same place for every car. Whether you're a front-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive, they're effectively all the same components and same suspension components, and that they're all housed within those same front and rear subframes. So in terms of the road car, anything forward of the bulkhead will be gone. We obviously have to add the roll cage to this. The roll cage isn't in it at the moment, so we would add the roll cage into the car as part of those chassis changes.
Are the front subframes, are they connected to the roll cage, or are they only connected to the body shell?
Yeah, so it'd probably be easier to show you on one of the cars further down the line. But yeah, effectively that whole system, if you imagine a front end crash, it's dissipating the energy around the driver.
Of course,
so that the last thing you want is for the driver to take the impact of that crash. So yeah, if you were to look at the roll cage sort of from the front, you can see how that energy would effectively trying to travel around the driver, as opposed to the driver taking any of that impact. But it all effectively.
We'd like to sort of look at this car here, just have a bit of an idea about.
Yeah, so if we were to look at this one from the side profile, you can see how these tubes pretty much all line up and eventually make their way into this larger roll cage assembly. You imagine that the driver in here, you want that energy to go past him rather than, you know, the driver taking the brunt.
Do you want to have a quick look in there? Can we look in there with the camera?
Of course, that's absolutely fine. So this is Colin's car from last year. So this one didn't get converted to a hybrid chassis. There are a few modifications we need to do to this car to get it sort of ready to house the hybrid components. So we've decided to leave this one as it was. This one actually won a championship previously. So we're going to convert that back to the same livery that it won the championship in, and keep that as historic piece, if you like.
Excellent.
Hence its half-built state at the moment. So yeah, no, you can start to see the differences between the original sort of shell that we're given versus this is effectively where we would end up once the shell comes back from Willie Poole Motorsport. One of the main things as well that we probably notice is quite different. The rear end is obviously modified to house that RML suspension kit.
Yes.
And also where the rear seats would normally be, we now have our fuel cell, or the housing for our fuel cell, if you'd like. So again, although it would look like a 3 Series from a distance, as you start to get a little bit closer to the car, you begin to see the differences between sort of production and race car, if you like.
It's interesting when we spoke a bit earlier when you said that these British touring cars are almost getting on to sort of being like single seaters, but with a body shell around them. They're not sort of. It's not just a 3 Series, that's then been that's then sort of hastily converted into a race car. It's really sort of like fundamental from the ground up. Sort of. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, it is at the end of the day, it is a purpose-built race car.
Yeah.
It is designed and built by WSR from the start. All the way through to its end product, if you like, and. And this is where you start to see the motorsport components coming through. It's not just a converted road car.
Yeah, because we had one question sort of from when you guys order a 3 Series from the factory, do they know that it's, which, I mean, obviously they probably know which one it is, but it's going to be used as a race car, or?
Do you know what, the person I would place the order with, obviously would know it's coming to us, but I can imagine as it gets further into the sort of supply chain, if you like, no, they probably don't.
No.
As far as they're concerned, a BMW dealer has ordered a shell. I mean, it's very rare a dealer would order a shell. I'm sure. I mean, you have to do some pretty serious damage to want a whole new shell. But I think further down the road, and as it gets closer to the factory, no, they probably don't know that it's going to be a road car. I literally hand over a standard BMW part number to the parts team and say, I would like 3 of those, please.
Very big part.
And then we're really lucky, actually, that the supply is brilliant. A few days later, a truck arrives with a shell ready to go.
So these are the points sort of that are the points kind of standardized to the front subframe.
That's right.
So they'd be the same as on basically every sort of British touring car.
Yeah,
they're all. You could almost, if not that you would, but you could sort the front end of all of them, or is it specifically a front wheel drive and rear wheel drive?
There's very small differences between front wheel drive and rear wheel drive, but effectively the model is that the subframes will bolt onto the cars, and they're effectively all the same subframes. There's very small differences between front wheel drive, rear wheel drive. Obviously, the main thing being that we have to house the prop shaft down to the diff at the back, and then the drive shafts. But even if you were to look at a front wheel drive car, you'd probably be seeing the same thing. We've got a few more components at the rear. They've got a few more components at the front. That's effectively the main differences. Any front wheel drive team will tell you that we've got a lot more space to work with in the engine bay.
So in terms of the creation of the shell and the roll cage and all this sort of, what's the sort of, how long does it take from sort of you giving that, sending that away to be sort of turned into a racing car? How long does that take?
So it varies, and you can imagine Willie Poole's very good at his job, and there's quite a few teams that want him to produce their shells, and it depends how many shells we're sending him at the same time, whether it's a one-off like 007 will be, whether we're new cars ready, so chassis 1, 2 and 3 ready, all for the start of the 2019 season it would have been. So it does vary, but I'd like to say on average, I don't know, maybe about 6 weeks from delivery of the shell to getting it back ready to start assembling and getting it back from paint, obviously, as well. So no, about 6 weeks. And then once we get to this stage, or I say probably very similar to what we can see the 1 Series behind us here, we've got the car at a point where we'd say it's 24-hour ready. So worst case scenario, let's say we had a big incident on a Saturday. Not that we'd ever want to, but we can build that car overnight as long as we've got the components.
So can we just have a look at this one? So I won't go, you know, obviously this is an older generation car. We won't go into this. Yeah, is there any bits that, well,
no, so this is all open.
This one's all open. So it's quite remarkable from my point of view, definitely not a race mechanic, that this would only take you 24 hours to get into a position to be able to race it.
Yeah. So the only thing I would like to probably have sitting in here ready, if this was a current 3 Series, would probably be the hard lines. But apart from that, yeah, as long as we've got the components ready, in stock, fully prepped, and it's probably worth saying, any sort of BMW component you see on the car, we have to modify to some degree. So as long as all that modification work has sort of been done, yes, we could effectively build this up over a 24-hour, overnight.
So when you say 24 hours, do you mean my 24 hours with 8 hours sleep, or do you mean actual 24 hours of non-stop solid work?
To be fair, I mean 24 hours of non-stop.
I thought that might be the case. Yeah.
Crews rotating through the night, and you know, we'd obviously have all hands on deck to try and get the car ready on time. And touch wood, it doesn't happen often, but there have been times where we've had to get a car ready overnight. But
so I can't imagine, or that you might tell me differently, I can't imagine there'd be any need to have this car ready in 24 hours. Obviously, it being the older generation car. Is that the case?
Yeah, no, that's completely right. So this shell was our spare back when we were running the 1 Series. Okay. So as I said before, we always like to have a spare shell ready to go. The last thing you want to do, it's a very tight championship, and the last thing you want to do is lose a race because a car can, not even enter a race because a car wasn't sort of built or couldn't be repaired in time. So that's when you then turn to your spare chassis. You have to get authorization from but yeah, as soon as that's done, you can get this one out, and you're then not losing points effectively for not getting out on time. But no, so we wouldn't use the 1 Series. Like I said, it was our spare back when we were running it, but this is now going to be built up using the older generation GPRN subframes that we've got. Okay. And we're hoping to build this into a rolling chassis to then sell to anyone who's interested effectively.
So this car's going to be up for sale?
It will eventually, yeah.
What would someone use it for?
So this could be a really exciting track day car for someone. I believe
a very exciting track day car.
I believe it can enter other championships as well. So there's a few other championships that would allow a car built to this spec to enter. It's effectively a brand new chassis, so it'd be a shame for that to go to waste.
What happens to the cars that that were used? What happens to them? Where have they ended up?
So eventually the cars either get sold. Sometimes the drivers like to keep hold of their cars, especially if they've had championship wins or some really good results. Depends really. I remember when I first joined, some cars went out to Asia. Some of the old E90s got sold to a team in Asia, and they were literally getting shipped out the day I joined West Surrey. So yeah, it's there's a wide range of areas a car can go: museum, a personal collection, or to another race team. So it's definitely not the end of its life when it leaves us.
Great. So how long have you been at West Surrey Racing?
So this is my 10th season now at West Surrey Racing. So I started my career here, if you like, back when I was at college. I'd done a week's work experience, just continued from there, or done work experience and never left, as some people in the team.
So you've seen the evolution of sort of the BMWs, in British touring car, from the E90 through to the current 3 Series, through the 1 Series.
Yeah.
In terms of what has it been the biggest sort of advantage change between as those cars have evolved?
So yeah, I mean, the team were effectively finishing chassis 1. So the first chassis of the 1 Series when I first joined, and I think through the years, as we've moved to the GPRN kit, we're now running a Gen 3 Cosworth system. The technology certainly improved. The cars look a lot more racy. There's probably, how would I describe it? I'd say that the cars have moved closer to what you'd see on a single seater, if you like. So if we look at the GPRM kit, obviously it was very successful and run for quite a few years.
Sorry, you say GPRM, just sort of like in terms of,
Sure.
for us layman's.
So GPRM are effectively a supplier of what we'd call the championship subframes and suspension components.
Okay, yes.
So again, everything from the bulkhead forward and all the rear suspension components, they're the same for everyone. It keeps costs down. It means that you have a parts truck from the supplier at the track.
Yeah.
So the parts are readily available, and you imagine if we all went off doing our own thing, costs would go through the roof. Everyone's going to keep trying to outdo each other. So it keeps it fair effectively and makes it an affordable championship, if you like. So yeah, GPRM were the supplier of those components up until where RML took over.
Yep.
So yeah, the GPRM kit, like I said, it works well for many years. Some of the components are probably quite bulky. Something you would expect to see on a touring car, I suppose, are the slightly bulkier components. RML, I think the stuff is a little bit lighter. RML have a history of running touring cars, well, from years ago, really. So I don't know if they carried over their knowledge from when they used to run their own touring car and then applied that to the kit. We obviously now have the hybrid system. So we're constantly trying to move with the times. And I think the championship does a good job of keeping the cars relevant. So although it is a purpose-built race car underneath, as I mentioned before, from the outside, it looks like a 3 Series.
Yes.
So the championship's always trying to remain relevant for the consumer, if you like.
Yep. Excellent. Well, so on that sort of like staying relevant, obviously to an extent, BMW want to keep the cars relevant to their brand, and they want their cars are, they look like their cars, they want them to be their cars. But obviously there's lots of standardized parts throughout that. When you're sort of discussing, the support that BMW gives to you, I mean, how is there much sort of negotiation from that point of view, or is it,
at the end of the day, people talk about factory teams. I think I've said before, factory teams in my eyes don't exist in the same way that you may have seen it in the past. But the support we get from BMW is brilliant. The parts supply, if I need a headlight, for example, I can order it, say, tonight, and I would normally see it the next morning. The obviously financial backing is a key thing. We can't go racing without that backing. It's one of those things. It's a very close partnership, and BMW, especially when we were building the cars, it was a brand new car, and they gave us so much access, and that really helps accelerate the process. We were trying to build these cars back in 2019 in a very tight time frame, if you like. And if we didn't have that support from the manufacturer, I don't think we would have got the cars built in time. Even down to the shell. I know of some teams that will literally be given a complete road car, and then they would have to strip those down, get them dipped, all the soundproofing removed again. But that's something that takes a lot of time and resources. We're very lucky in a sense that we
kind of wasteful. I mean, ending up with a load of interior parts and dashboards and all that, and suspension components and all those sort of things that will be completely irrelevant for what it's going to be used for.
Effectively never used again. And no longer fit for a race car, if you like, in the championship that we're running in. So it's great to have such a prestigious manufacturer on board, and it's nice to be able to represent such a global brand such as BMW in the championship. And I'd like to think, they also gain from us being in this championship and having a car that looks like the 3 Series, effectively, something that the fans can recognise. Yeah,
excellent. Right then, well, I think now we're at this point here, and obviously what we've got behind us is a massive race truck, and that'll be interesting for us to go and have a look into. I think that'll be the sort of thing that most people, who may have seen it outside of it, but never seen inside of it. So if we can go and have a look inside, that'll be great.
So this is one of 2 of our race Arctics. This one is nearly as old as me, so it's doing quite well. So these were purpose-built trailers over 25 years ago. You can notice we've got all the belly lockers down the bottom. So that will house all of our consumables, spare parts, equipment throughout the weekend. So we've got two of these trucks.
Yep.
This one is our main race truck. This will house two cars, or will hold two cars for travel. The back tail lift effectively comes all the way down, will lift the cars up, and then the cars will sit on top of those workbenches in here.
So yeah, if we go inside and
head up inside the truck. The cars will sit on this work surface, so that's how they'll get to and from each event. Underneath, we've got separate sort of little areas where we will put our toolboxes.
Yep.
So all the mechanics' toolboxes were sort of custom made to fit with this truck, so they'll all come to the track with us.
Cool.
We have all of our consumables for a race weekend, so all our nuts and bolts, anything we could want to sort of rebuild a car.
So I mean,
on site at an event is
there at least one of all of these things somewhere on the car somewhere? So you've not got, you're not carrying around something that's just sort of extra bits. There's at least one of those bolts somewhere on the car.
Correct, and if not, then it's something that we think we might need, or we could make it work if we had to. But we try and carry at least one spare of every component. So there's not a lot we can't fix on a race weekend. So if we had a major issue on a Saturday, or were unfortunate enough to be involved in a collision on a Saturday, there's not a lot we can't do at a track. We've actually had sponsors very kindly drive panels up to us on a race weekend, and we've replaced sides of cars on some occasions. It's that mentality of, we will get out, we will race, and the car will be right. And
I suppose the car's designed from that point of view to be able to do that, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's a very sort of modular system, if you like. You can pull away large areas of the car and replace them relatively easily if they were damaged for any reason. But it's, again, like it is just a case of, we know what we need to do to get the car out, and it's just a case of having enough time to do it.
Yeah, I suppose it doesn't feel easy when you're trying to do it over a race weekend. No. Possibly you've not got, although as wonderful as this is, you've not got the full luxury of the entire workshop and the space and those sort of things.
Yeah, so this effectively becomes our mobile workshop. The other race trailer that we have, so this one has a small area up the front where I would effectively sit on a race weekend with Steve, our chief mechanic. Again, we've got more spare components up the front. On the front of the other truck, we've actually got a small machine shop.
Oh, wow.
So we can actually fabricate and make components on site if we need to. This is effectively our workshop on site, and we would have very similar facilities just working out of our two trucks as what we would here.
So at the back, you said this is, you've got kind of somewhere, but you've always got like a clean workshop area at the back here. So working on, I'm guessing, things like gearboxes, diffs, engines, that sort of stuff here.
Exactly that. So we've just come back from testing literally yesterday, so excuse any mess. We're obviously still unpacking from that previous test.
Lots of fuel for the workers as well. That's important.
Crisps and fizzy drinks gets us through the day. But yeah, we have a small area up here where a mechanic could bring their gearbox. Sometimes we need to change ratios at the track. So you want a quiet area out of the way where they can concentrate. Same as what we'd have in the workshop. And the mechanics can come up here, change the ratios on the car, not get distracted, not have the loud noises of the pit lane or a support series running out the front, and get the job done in here and then take it back to the car and assemble it. And that is exactly the same process we would have in the workshop. The components would go into sub-assembly first, and then they'd come back to the race bay and be fitted to the.
So in terms of the amount of stuff that you're taking to a race weekend, are you literally, are you taking the spare cars when you've got them? Are you taking spare engines? Are you taking everything, or are you
nearly? So spare cars are banned in the regulations on site at the track anyway. So we're allowed to have them at the workshop, but we're not allowed them at the track just because it takes up more space. And you can imagine if everyone bought an extra truck with a spare shell, we'd run out of room in the paddock. But apart from that, yes, we've got spare engines. Like I said, every component on the car, we have at least one spare. R6, which is our support trailer, has a spare piece of bodywork all the way around for all three cars. So there's effectively another 3 sets of bodywork on the truck.
Okay.
Like we see, all the nuts and bolts. So yeah, we carry a fair bit.
Yeah.
And then that's also along with all of our garage equipment as well.
Of course, yes. Excellent. Okay, right. Well, while I've still got you, Carl, before we talk to Sophie or Ryan, we'll have a look at one of the cars and we'll have a look at the hybrid system. If that's all right. You can sort of run us through kind of what that looks like, what that has meant for you guys in terms of the changes, and what and what it means for the actual sort of like the rules within sort of because there's obviously change of rules rather than sort of championship ballast. It's all going to be down to the hybrid system. So if we have a look at that.
So if we have a look at the rocket car, I'm hoping Ryan hasn't taken anything out yet to begin servicing it. So effectively, this was, well, it's where the driver would sit in the UK, but in our terms, it's effectively where the passenger seat would have been, as we have a left-hand drive car. That is now got obviously this huge battery sort of mounted to the floor. So when we start talking about the chassis modifications, we need obviously an area for this battery to mount to. This is essentially, I'd say, 80% of the hybrid components, and I'm sure Ryan and Sophie can go into a lot more detail about the sort of hardware itself. But from a championship point of view, we used to run success ballast. So the success ballast was brought in to try and equalize the championship. The driver who's leading the championship would have up to 75 kilos worth of weight. The idea being that it would slow them down slightly and it would create a bit more overtaking, and the same person wouldn't always be leading, or it'd make it a little bit harder for them to continue leading. So the championship ballast has now gone. So the huge lead slabs that we had to put in has thankfully disappeared, but that has now been replaced by the battery and the other hybrid components. This is a very similar weight to what first place ballast would have been last year.
Yep.
So everyone's now effectively carrying that little bit more weight. So
does that help you in terms of, I suppose this is maybe a question for the mechanic guys, is about sort of when it comes to the, although we won't go into details about the setup, but is it you're working from a familiar position, a familiar point of view, because it's the same sort of weight that you've kind of been used to adding?
Yeah, to a degree. I mean, this is slightly further forward, which would have an impact on the handling of the car.
Of course.
But yeah, it's hard to say. We've only done 1 day's worth of testing so far with all the kit installed, so we're still assessing the impacts. Certainly having the battery and the weight further forward, I would say is probably a disadvantage, but just because of the balance of the car. But
and is the position of it obviously not dictated by you guys? It's been dictated by the regulations.
That's correct. Yeah. So we're told where that battery sort of needs to mount within the chassis. In terms of how that equalization will work on a race weekend now. So in FP1, FP2 and qualifying, we'll have so many seconds that we can use the extra bit of power that the hybrid would give us.
Yes.
And if you're leading the championship, you effectively now get less use of that extra power, if you like.
Okay.
During the race, it will be less laps. So you imagine a 15-lap race. One of our drivers, if they were leading the championship, maybe sort of only able to use the hybrid for 2 laps, for example.
And everyone, so there is the hybrid system, you get a certain amount of seconds per lap to use the boost.
Yeah, that's right. And those seconds will change depending where you are in the championship.
Oh, okay.
So it's the amount of time that changes during FP1 and qualifying.
Okay.
And it's the amount of laps that you get that hybrid for that changes during the races.
Great. Okay.
And hopefully by the time we get racing, we're going to have a small LED light that will be situated in the rear window. So anyone watching from home, if they have a look at that rear light, that will hopefully tell you how much of that hybrid energy the driver has left.
Oh, okay. Will we be able to see when they're using it? Will it be obvious? Will we sort of like, will you be watching this thing and suddenly someone presses their hybrid boost button and you'll see them sort of like, rocket forward a little bit? Is it that distinct and that obvious?
So it's not like, I think one of our drivers described it, it's not like hitting the MOS button on Fast and Furious, unfortunately. It almost just takes that resistance up the car for a little bit. So the driver can feel it. I don't think you'll necessarily see it, but it's that small bit that you might need to be able to make that overtake.
Right.
So small gains, but they'll all equate to something over the course of a race.
And if if the driver has saved it for an opportune moment and uses it when it's most advantageous on particular circuits, and there's going to be so much sort of like learning that the drivers and the teams and you guys are going to do around this system, because it's obviously all new,
No, that's completely right. And there will be a lot of strategy that comes into it.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to the drivers at the tests yesterday, and we predominantly, a safety car is not an unknown quantity in touring cars. The safety car makes an appearance fairly regularly, and you need to start thinking about how much hybrid have you used before the safety car period versus how much have you saved for the safety car period, for example. There's many different strategic ways that you can deploy this hybrid system, and that's something that all the teams will learn as we move forward. And I'm sure eventually we'll all work out where is best to deploy and whether you want to use that system to either attack or defend.
Yeah, excellent. Right, so we're Ryan's car, I suppose. So let's have a chat with you about this. And I think what's interesting, sort of, to going back to what we said before, and the sort of the standardized parts of certain things, is that we have a back axle here that is a race car back axle to an extent, in terms of, so when we get drivers testing and they come back with sort of feedback, and they feed that back to their engineers, and their engineers then sort of says, we kind of almost consider it like a translator between you and the driver to sort of then turn those, the things that they want to change and things that they want, the effects they want on the car, and that ends up at your door. You've got to then change it. I suppose what would be, from a point of view of what's available to change? I mean, not just on the back axle, but throughout the whole car. What can you change? Even on a race weekend, what is available to change?
In terms of like setup of the car, generally that is what we would focus more efforts into, because that would be the biggest gain for us. Unless it's mechanical, unless it's something that's physically wrong with the car, there's a lot of setup components. We can change the camber, the toe, ride height, can change anti-roll bar stiffness. All these changes are done pretty quick and are quite easy to get to in terms of access. Not like a road car where, if you were to tow a BMW, like for a wheel alignment, it would take you a little while to set up all the equipment. We can, tow the car within 5-10 minutes, have it out for the next race, and sort any issue there is. So there's a lot of ways to be tuned.
I suppose, and that's kind of the one. Is that, would you say, the major benefit of going to this sort of like standardized sort of things is the ability to change things, as well as it being, probably set up as a race car, but is it that sort of like that ability to be able to swap things and make those detail changes as quickly as possible? Is that the benefit of having this sort of thing over a road car suspension?
Yeah, I would say so, in terms of like the access and everything. Everything's made for speed, essentially.
Yeah.
Everyone's got the same equipment, the same suspension and that. So we know, after running this kit since 2015, is that right? Yeah, 2015.
Okay.
So we know what each change does now in the car. It's not unknown quantity. If we were to change camber on one side or toe, we would know the effects of what changing camber does to the toe to adjust that accordingly to compensate for where we want to be.
Okay. And you say I won't go ask you, because detail changes in a particular sort of setup is something that's quite secretive, so I won't go into trying to sort of like reveal too much. But you say you change camber maybe on one side rather than the other. Is that sort of things that you're doing? Sort of, I mean, on a road car, we're expecting that you change everything per side to be equal. But are there certain times, certain tracks where there are certain you change one side to be different to the other?
I think it depends on where you are as well, and where you're racing, what conditions. Generally, most of the tracks in the UK that we race at are clockwise direction.
Yep.
So you would have more load on the outside of the car, so your left-hand side of the car.
Yep.
So you may want to add more camber on that side
to
compensate when the car rolls over.
Yeah.
Things like that. It's generally quite close. But like I said, given conditions, maybe it rains, maybe you want to change camber to give you a bit more traction, a bit more grip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Okay, yeah, so that's interesting because again, it's not something that I suppose that well, I would have expected particularly, but it's because we when you think about NASCARs and stuff, they're all set up sort of in one side because they obviously go around one type of corner, so the sort of like the changes obviously quite from across the car are quite extreme. Whereas it's not obvious. It's not obvious when you look at a strong car, you can't see those changes. But I suppose small changes make a big difference to cars like this.
Yeah, I think some of them do make a big difference. Some give the drivers a placebo effect of making a difference.
Okay.
Small changes. It's known how much to change when you get to that point of whether it does too much and throws the car in the other direction, or whether it's just on the line of what it needs.
Okay, in terms of sort of, I suppose, from that point of view about going too far, you've become very familiar with these cars. You become very familiar with the suspension and the setups and stuff. I mean, is there a situation where when you're asked to do something and you immediately know how much to change it by, or is that something the engineer comes up with and then you kind of follow that line, or are you just in discussion with the engineer about sort of by how much change right camber or toe?
Generally, the engineer would give me instruction in terms of what he's looking for.
Okay.
Sometimes they may ask something specific to be changed.
Okay.
But sometimes there might be a discussion in terms of how much we're changing that by and the best way to go about it. For example, you can adjust ride height on the car by either adjusting the push rod or the damper length, so compressing the spring on the platform.
Okay.
So there's two ways you can do that there. You can also change corner weights by doing that as well. Adding more to one corner than the other. So there is scope to do the same, to achieve the same effect with a different.
So with there being so many changes that you can make and quickly, is that you can always achieve different results, or the same result with different ways, or different results with the same way almost. Yeah. Which makes it very complicated. It's not. This is not. I mean, I know that, like you say, it's designed to change quickly, but but it's obviously the changes that can be made create such a difference, but it's very, very complicated in that sense. It must take a while to become familiar with with those parts with the car too.
Yeah, and also different engineers have different approaches to setting up cars as well. So they might prefer to do a change one way, whereas an engineer might prefer to do, and it just depends what philosophy and what they're used to and their background as well. So we have the standard, what we know as mechanics in terms of what one change does, and being familiar with these cars now, we know like what one turn of ride height does to the car in terms of and what each little increment should give you when you measure it after changing. So
cool. Let's go around sort of like the back a bit further, and we'll have a look at sort of, I suppose, aero is a sort of something that perhaps, certainly from my point of view, and maybe a lot of people that are very familiar with road cars, it's something that's it's a bit of an art. It's a bit sort of, it almost seems like something that you don't quite understand. So in terms of when you're at a race weekend, how often are you changing aero, the rear wing and the angle of the rear wing over a weekend maybe? Is it something that you can sort of anticipate beforehand?
I'd say depending on what track we go to, we usually set the rear wing, for example, one particular point where we've ran there before.
Okay.
There's scope in terms of we might go, as you see on the rear wing, there's 6 holes here for adjustment.
Yeah.
So each of them will give us slightly different aero. So if we have a car that's understeering, we might change one hole to change the aero balance of the car. But generally, we stay in that sort of sweet spot, as you would say.
The one that
once we get the overall aero balance, it doesn't change too much in terms of track.
Okay, so you've not got, I'm thinking sort of between a fast track like Silverstone and a slower track like Cadwell or something like that. You know what I mean? So you're not changing, even with those sort of like big variety of tracks, you're not actually changing the aero too much between those two tracks?
Not too much, where we go like small steps between.
Okay.
For example, racing at Thruxton, a lot of high speed corners.
Yeah.
And then you compare that to somewhere perhaps like Brands Indy, where it's a little bit slower, tighter corners like Druids and that.
Yeah.
And we'd run more wing in those sort of tracks.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, cool. Right then, I think if we go and have a look at engine. I think so. If we can sort of, was it the car down at the bottom? We're going to have a look at let's have a look at the front of the car and have a look at the engine. Before we have a look at the sort of the detailing of the car, can we pass back to you and you can talk us through sort of the relationship that with BMW and the engines that we're now, because I think I certainly was under the impression that British touring cars use a standardized engine, use the TOCA engine, and that's not the case with you guys, is it?
No, so there is what we call a TOCA engine available. It's an engine that you can lease from the championship that is supplied by M Sport this year. Obviously, M Sport are well known for their World Rally team, but they obviously do a lot of other sort of engineering bits and pieces and for customer teams here and there around the world. But no, M Sport are the supplier of the engine for TOCA this year. I believe that may be based on a Ford. Now, as you can imagine, if we were to be winning our championships with a Ford engine inside a BMW, that maybe wouldn't go down too well with BMW. So no, we're very lucky in a sense that we actually do use a BMW engine. We're actually using the BMW B48, which is used in the 3 Series, and it was also used in the 1 Series. So we ran the B48 in our 1 Series for a year prior to moving to the 3 Series. We wanted to spend a year developing that engine and just sort of ironing out any issues if there was any before introducing it into a new chassis. At least that way, when we introduced the 3 Series, we were putting a known quantity into this chassis, and you can sort of remove any questions about whether the engine was having an effect on the rest of the car or not. But yeah, effectively, the engine we use, the components will be very similar to what you would have on your road car. They're just developed and designed for performance, effectively. But one of the main differences you'll notice straight away is we don't have the huge engine over the top. So everything needs to be accessible. If we need to change an engine in between races for any reason, we've normally got about 2 hours. So you can imagine we need that full 2 hours. To be able to get that job done in time.
At the very least, I suspect. If it were me, it would definitely 2 days wouldn't even scratch the surface. But yes.
So yeah, as well as everything being designed for performance, it's also designed to come apart nice and quickly and be accessible as well. All the cars in the championship have 2-litre 4-cylinder engines. So we're all the same in that sense. And we all use the same turbo as well. So everyone has the same turbo within their car. We're very lucky to be working with Neil Brown Engineering. So they effectively take the original B48. We'll take that away and do some development work, obviously within the regulations to optimize the performance.
I suppose the difference between what an engine will need to do in a normal 3 Series, not just in terms of the power output that's required, but the actual sort of the life of the engine, it can be a lot shorter with this sort of stuff. How many races do you do with an engine?
So we're only allowed 2 engines per season per a car within a team. So effectively, once you start going over that allocation of engines, you're then losing teams points from that point onwards. So reliability and sort of lifing of these engines is actually quite important to us. And we're very lucky in a sense that we believe we can safely use this engine for the majority of the season before having to change it. We're lucky to be working with BMW. BMW have created a great road engine, a great sort of starting point for us to begin with. So yeah, we can almost, dare I say, stretch an engine for most of the season.
When it's being designed, when it's being sort of engineered to become a race engine, that's one of the, you're not building an engine just to be used one weekend and then swap it out. It has to be engineered to last as well as produce sufficient power and those sorts of things too.
Yeah, exactly that. So gone are the days where you would put in a qualifying engine that would do qualifying and that's about it. At the end of the day, it all comes down to budget again. And I believe that's why the regulations are in place. It's to stop teams coming in and putting a new engine in the car, running it to its absolute max and effectively that being thrown away. So just reducing that waste as well.
Are there budget caps that are within the championship, or is it down to the standardisation of parts and those sort of things that are used to keep the budget restrictions to an extent, or are there actual caps?
So there's no caps as such, but you're completely right. The way that we use the standardized parts and have the regulations that limit how often you can change something like an engine, that's the way that the championship remains affordable. That's how we get such a large grid, and effectively the large grid is what makes our racing entertaining. So yeah, the championship has done a great job in sort of getting the right suppliers on board and making those same parts available to everyone. You can imagine these parts are then made in much larger quantities. If I was to ask for 3 of a component and go out and get that manufactured myself, that's going to cost a lot more per unit than, let's say, if RML went away and sort of made 30 of a component. Their cost per unit will obviously be less. Someone like RML is obviously sort of built and in a position to produce most of these components in-house as well. Again, further reducing their costs per component. And that's effectively where, as close as what we would get to a budget cap, if you like.
Yeah. Right, and now we're at the front of the car. We'll hand over to Sophie and we have a look at sort of like some of the bits of the front of the car here. I suppose, unlike the rear suspension, we can't really see a lot, especially as we're going in. But I won't put the camera in too far. But I suppose one major change when it comes to suspension-wise from this and what would be a standard car is that we've got an anti-roll bar right across the top, whereas normally that would be underneath. Is that purely so that it can be changed more easily, or is it adjusted more easily? Is that the sort of it? Yeah,
it's fully adjustable, so we can adjust it to full hard, full stiff. And you can also change the thickness of the roll bar as well. So if there's loads, you can adjust and do that.
And much more easily, I suppose, rather than to crawl underneath it.
It just takes minutes.
And again, is that the situation with? I mean, in terms of a setup change, what would be the most difficult thing to sort of like change setup wise? What takes the longest?
I'd say ratios. Our engineer gives us a minimum of 30 minutes to get the ratios from current now built to back in the car run up.
So that's
got 30 minutes.
Take the gearbox out, change the ratios, and get with 30 minutes.
And run up.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. But it's not long.
No, it's not long, but that's the longest you get is 30 minutes, and that's
the minimum.
Well,
they give you.
Wow.
If they want to, if it's less than 30 minutes to go out to qualify, then they won't call it. So. And it's usually piping hot.
Okay, yes, you're burning yourself on gearbox oil and all that stuff. You did show me earlier when we were talking about with Ryan the change in ride height, that not only can you sort of change the preload on the springs and the spring compressor, but the actual push rods as well. And this is so these are sort of like some of the push rods that go into the suspension. Are these front or rear?
This is the front push rod.
Front push
you can
rods.
either get short and long ones, so you can just crack off the 2 nuts either end. And it will just wind up and down. So
there's the ability to not only have you got 2 different types, short and long, you can also adjust the height incrementally and like really detail between
depending on your setup and how high or low the engineer wants the car to sit, then we choose which push rods and what height to set them to.
Generally, without going into too much detail, particularly what situation would you want the ride height to be? Great. Would you want a taller ride height?
So if it's wet, we'd want it higher.
Okay.
And if it's dry, then normally sit lower.
Excellent. Okay, yeah, fantastic. Right then, we were speaking earlier about the bodywork on the car, and that's been really interesting about sort of like how much of it is still genuine bits of BMW bodywork, and is something that the doors and the bonnet are actually sort of they're from the modified, but from the sort of like from the production car.
So doors and bonnet, headlights are all BMW. I believe the boot. Not the boot, the rear bumper is BMW as well.
Okay.
And we just lighten it all. So you can see the bonnet is completely cut away.
Yeah.
To make that lighter. And over here, I actually have a door card taken off. So you can see what we do to the doors.
Yeah.
So we completely cut away the inside of the door.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Not that I guess you really look at your road car doors, but fully stripped. And we have this impact foam in for safety of the driver.
Okay.
So if you had a T-bone incident, that will take some of the impact.
Yeah.
All the mechanisms are BMW as well, other than the door handle.
Okay. Oh yeah. Other than that. Yeah, because what we do expect to see is not only would you expect to see another bit of sort of another sheet of metal there, but also, you know, electric window components and all that sort of stuff. And obviously that's completely gone, and we've got just a bit of, you know, a plastic window bolt. Is that bolted in, or is there any facility for them to lower the window?
It's just
bolted in. Oh, okay.
You can't lower it. Nothing. It's all done for weight.
And so, in, you know, in terms of sort of the ventilation about, you know, within the car, is there some ventilation there?
They've got like an air blower, so it comes from the engine bay, a bit of fresh air through to the driver if they get too hot. So in these setup changes and the sort of incremental things that you guys do, and changing camber and anti-roll bars and things, I mean, what facilities do the drivers have to be able to change the car to suit them when they're actually on track? Have they got any way of doing? They don't have a lot. All they can really do is brake bias.
Okay.
That mechanically, that's all they can really change.
Yeah.
Other than your standard, put your headlights on, indicators. That's really about it. Wiper motor.
And did you say there are different engine maps as well? Yes.
So you've got the engine guys will put in different maps for wet conditions, dry conditions, a cool down map, a standard running map, because the engine can get very hot. So every time the car comes in, you'll hear it make a funny noise, and that's the cool down map to try and get it to get it to a normal temperature sort of thing. And again, with these new cars, as well as the engine map, there's a hybrid facility to be able to change what the hybrid system's doing too. Correct. Yes.
So I think we discussed it earlier. There were changes in sort of the amount of, was it regen that the hybrid sort of taking?
There's 12 different hybrid maps.
Okay.
I don't think all 12 are in use, but you've got some to make hybrid work. You can turn it off. There's a regen mode. There's, I'm not sure what else there is.
Again, I suppose this hybrid system for you guys is although you on top of it completely, but this is new. This is a new world for you guys, and there's going to be lots of learning throughout the season, and for every team to understand, how this challenge works and how to sort of best utilize it. And as Carl was saying earlier, I suppose the exciting thing to an extent, and possibly worrying from you guys maybe, is just how tactically how advantageous this might be able to be within racing. It's going to add a lot more strategy potentially to what you guys can do within a race and over a race weekend, to make sure that it's the weight. You're obviously relatively familiar with the weight ballast that's been before, but this adds a whole other dimension, and saving times, saving your boost before or after safety cars and throughout the lap, those sort of things. It's going to be a lot of work for you guys. Yeah, excellent. I mean, right. So when it comes to bodywork, obviously this isn't. You won't find this on a normal 3 Series.
No, so this stuff's really cool. It's all done by this company here, Goodwood Composites. So it's just a fiberglass layout. It's very light. It's amazing stuff. It literally just bolts straight on.
So when it comes to the development of this stuff, and obviously, has there been many changes from the previous years with 3 Series to this year? I mean, in terms of the sort of arches or anything within the bodywork, has there been any changes?
Yes. So we have redesigned the front bumper for this year.
Yeah.
It's always changing. We're always trying to develop.
We can go around and have a look. Yeah. Can you show us sort of vaguely, sort of like which bits you've had?
So we've got new LTRs from the hybrid system. So this is to cool them down.
Okay, right.
We've also got a new grille from BMW.
Yeah.
We sort of extended the front bumper a little bit extra.
Okay, excellent. And the bonnet wise, sort of when it comes to modifying and changing those sort of things, how much are you developing and testing that beforehand, or is it very much a kind of try it and see how it works?
Yeah, it is. When we first cut up the bonnet, we went a little bit too far. So it's literally just trial and error sometimes.
Yeah, you want it to be as light as humanly possible, sort of thing. And
our design team's like spot on, so it's normally correct first time, but it's always just developing. Every time we go out, we're always learning.
So you say the composites, the arches and stuff are created by the company. Do you design them all? Do you design them all in house, or are they?
Yes.
Yeah. The bodywork is designed in house. We start off with obviously the standard BMW bodywork, and then we can adapt that within the regulations. The nice thing about all the bodywork is it's not just lightweight; it's also very easy to repair. It's got a small bit of flex in it. You can imagine touring cars do touch each other every now and then.
Do they? I've never noticed.
So it does have a small bit of flex, but if it does break, it is very easily repaired. A lot of this can go straight back into the mould and sort of come back looking brand new every time.
Oh, so you often, if a body panel, one of the body panels gets damaged, you will reuse it. Essentially, you'll fix it and reuse it. You're not 100%. Sort of going, oh, that's. I mean, I suspect they'll get so damaged, potentially get so damaged, you never use them. Most of the time, you do.
I would say at least 90% of the time, these panels are all reused.
Oh, wow.
And that is one of the benefits of working with fiberglass. So yeah, no, it's great that we can sort of get these parts produced by Goodwood, and they fit so well after. There's almost like a chain of events that happen with this bodywork. It's designed by our engineers. We'll then have the tooling produced, and then it will go to the tooling will then go to Goodwood. Goodwood will create a mold, and then eventually be able to give us the end component. And then once that mold is there, there's normally, in terms of what we do, we can pretty much put that bodywork in and out of the mold for repairs as many times as what we would need within the lifetime of the car. So yeah, no, but even down to the BMW parts, as Sophie said, a lot of it is also modified as well. So there's not a lot that is standard on the car. It's all modified for performance or weight, or even just sometimes to house certain components, i.e. like the blue impact foam. You would never fit that in if we use the standard.
Standard
door.
So when it comes to the sort of the obviously restricted by regulations to an extent, the arches and stuff are wider, on this car. Is that, I mean, is that dictated by the rules, or is there a certain sort of like width you can go to? Or?
Yeah, so there is a width that we have to run within the boundaries of your obviously, as with anything like this, there needs to be a margin. So you're given a few millimeters sort of inside as to sort of your bodywork width, if you like. And again, we need to account for damage as well. So panels will move slightly in an impact, obviously. But yeah, a lot of the bodywork is regulated. Carbon fiber, for example, is completely banned unless it's for safety purposes, or unless you get it signed off by TOCA. And again, that is another one of those cost-saving.
So that's why we're not seeing about carbon fiber bonnets and doors and those sort of things. They are, they are the production ones because that's what's required by the regulations.
Yeah, exactly that. So when Sophie was showing the door on the other side, we have a large carbon fiber side impact panel. Again, that is for safety purposes and is there to protect the driver. Outside of that, one of the few carbon fiber components would be the rear wing and the end plates. But again, that's the same for everyone. So no one's at an advantage for using that lighter material, if you like.
Yes. One question I've got, this is something that I've spotted on TV and stuff, are these stickers here with this picture of this hook on? What's that for?
Yeah, so I'll pass back to Sophie, and Sophie can explain what they're all about.
Sorry, I didn't see what you point out.
So there's a little sticker here with a hook on. What's that for?
So that's for lifting. So if there's a serious incident, or say it goes in gravel, it just lifts the car at an even rate. So that is where it balances effectively.
So I mean, underneath there, is there there's a hole with a thing you can thread.
It's like a little tube, and you wind whatever tool they've got, and it in their crane, it will just lift straight up.
And so that
it will lift up pretty evenly.
So. So that's been set based on you know, where about the middle of the weight is going to be.
Centre of gravity.
Okay, excellent. Can we have a look at your sort of setup plate sort of thing where you put the car there? That's, yeah, because that's a fascinating bit as well. So in terms of when you guys are setting up the car here, obviously a kind of a base setup, obviously there's going to be changes when you get to a track potentially, but this is obviously where you want to get the sort of the fundament. So this is a huge block of steel essentially that's been sort of, and it's been level and it's flat and it's all those sort of things.
Zero.
Yeah,
it's the flattest
and so,
part of the workshop.
Yeah, so and so you're putting cars onto it via a forklift truck as well. Yes. So you're bringing them in, not on their wheels. They come in.
So they come in minus wheels, and then we have set up wheels that we can put on there.
Yeah,
which I can.
Yeah, let's have a look at one of those because they're fascinating. Because you can tell me what they're called as well and why they're called it.
When I first started here, my first number one said they're set-up wheels, but he said we call them Kenny's because they look like Kenny from South Park.
Sorry, it's all good. Like that. Excellent. And they've got casters on the bottom so that when they're on the car, you can make all the changes and it allows the wheels to move and all that sort of stuff.
It's just free movement, and it's easily accessible to do any setup changes, so you don't have to take it on and off.
Okay, so you can be formed all with that on there as it is.
And then we have bags in here to simulate driver weight.
Okay.
Because you want to set the car up as it would be on track.
How often are you monitoring the driver's weights to make sure how accurate it is? If they put on loads of stuff over a weekend or whatever, do you have to?
Every 3 months.
Every 3 months.
Normally they tell us if they eat a bit more or less.
Excellent. Oh, great. So in terms of, I mean, this feels like quite a sort of, this is quite a significant sort of thing. I mean, is this, I mean, I don't want you to talk about other teams so much, but are there other teams that are using similar setups? Have they got these sort of facilities?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I've never been to another team's workshop, but I can only assume they have a flat patch of some sort.
Yeah.
Even at a track, we make our own flat patch.
Oh, really? Okay.
That everyone should be on a flat patch.
Excellent. In terms of it, so when it comes to this, you have the driver's weight in there so that you can set up, so you can corner weight to kind of get the weight distribution across the car and forward and back as accurate as possible. Okay. Yeah. Excellent. Right then. Well, I think if we go back to the car and have a sort of a bit of a look at that. So I think we're going to have some more questions possibly about West Surrey Racing. So, you might be able to. You might be the best person to.
We'll stand in the middle and share. We'll see where it goes.
Because I suppose the thing is that you have all you have to do is look up here and the amount of trophies and things that are on that wall to show just maybe sort of the experience and the success that this team has had. I mean, when it comes to working for someone as successful as that, does that feel, when it goes at the start of every championship, do you feel the weight of expectation at the start of every season?
I always make a joke about these trophies. There's two. The first one is I can leave once that wall is full. The second one, believe it or not, is these are what I call the leftover trophies. These are the ones that the drivers decided not to take home or haven't gone to the manufacturer. So I always look at that and I'm quite proud that if the leftovers look that impressive, we're doing something right. So it's great to be working for a team that is so successful. And I mean, at the end of the day, that's down to the team as a whole. Everyone's got the same sort of work ethic. We're all here to win races. In terms of weight on our shoulders, I wouldn't say that anyone goes to a racetrack with a weight on their shoulders. We go to the track, we know the job we need to do. We have the correct processes in place, and more importantly, we have the correct staff in place.
Okay.
We're resourced correctly for the job we're doing, and everyone is obviously well trained in each area of the car or each area of the team that they work within. And I think we all know, as long as we go in and do our job, do what we've been taught, things should go to plan. you know, our chief mechanic will always say it's won and lost in the workshop, and he's completely right. We strip these cars down to effectively a bare shell, so very similar to the car that we looked at earlier on. And I think that level of detail does two things. A, we get to inspect the car, you know, to the absolute millimeter, if you like, and see components that may look like they're beginning to fail, but, you know, before they do. We obviously have very strict lifing with all of our components as well. So where we've had failures in the past, for whatever reason, we log the mileage at which that failure happens. You start looking at trends. And yeah, I mean, a second thing, another reason that I'm quite keen or quite happy that we strip the cars down to that level is the mechanics are getting practice. Week in, week out, they're taking these cars completely apart and putting them back together. And for me, I think that always sort of shows on the race weekend when we do need to change components. You know, the mechanics I find naturally know what tools they're going to need, what parts of the car need to be removed, and exactly how long it's going to take them. That planning has already gone on in their head. They already know the process to get from you know, a damaged component to a car that's ready to race within the timescale available to them. And if they need more resources, they know exactly who to talk to get those resources.
That's interesting. We've mentioned tools, and thankfully we've got a kind sponsor of Machine Mart as well for this evening.
Brilliant.
And going back to tools, Sophie, when it comes to the, you know, obviously you've got a workshop here full of tools and all sorts of specialist equipment, but what is the tool that is completely sort of, what's invaluable? What couldn't you live without?
For me, and hopefully Ryan will agree, it's flat grips.
Okay. Can we have a look at, can we wear a patch?
I was going to go for a steel ruler.
Yeah, so flat grips are pretty cool.
I mean,
it's
not to be used
you out of
in
trouble
place of a
sometimes.
spanner.
Not to be used as a pry bar.
but I suppose that's the sort of, you know, in terms of, it's interesting that, I mean, obviously you're doing loads and loads of sort of very, very sort of like high tech stuff, but ultimately when it comes down to it as well, is that it's your knowledge that's the specialist thing, and actually the tools that you're using are some of the time, obviously not all, you know, there's some very, very specialist equipment, but a lot of the tools you're using are the tools that, you know, that quite are relatively accessible, that are sort of like most people are using. It's how you use them. Yeah, what's the difference when I pick, you know, a set of flat grips? It's very different results than what you'd be getting with them. But it's great to it's great that that there is something, I suppose, because as you're saying, with these cars are very specialist. You know, they may look a bit like a 3 Series, but underneath it's a, you know, it's really proper sort of high end motorsport, you know, engineering going on with these cars. But you know that there is, you know, elements that are accessible to human beings like us, mortals, that we might understand. So it's great to see. When it comes to this sort of stuff, when it comes to the kind of the specialist sort of like areas of these cars, what would you say is the sort of the most advanced part of a British touring car? Maybe it's yeah, so what would you sort of say that's the furthest from the road car that, you know, that we would have?
For me, you know, a lot of it is very similar, and actually if you broke it down at the end of the day, it's just nuts and bolts. I think the specialist area comes from the accuracy and the attention to detail as such in certain areas. So you know, we really are working within the millimeter every single time, and I think trying to do that, but also at the same pace in which we have to do it, is sort of where that specialist skill sort of comes into it. As I was saying earlier, the planning, you know, as a number one mechanic, when your car arrives back from race 1 and you've got 2 hours to get it ready for race 2, I think it's that knowledge of the car as a whole, and being able to plan ahead as to how you're going to get that car ready for race 2, alongside doing all your usual setup changes. Because, you know, just because the car's damaged, the engineer certainly won't settle for oh, we're not going to do any setup changes just because it's damaged. So yeah, I think that's kind of where the specialist side of it comes into it. And you know, we've always sort of said, if you have someone who's keen, willing to learn, and has the right attitude, we could probably teach most people how to work on these cars. I think it's the mindset that changes, and that's probably where you see the difference.
Okay, and having that, I suppose, that the mindset not just to work with as a motorsport mechanic and have that mindset to sort of like be there, but have the mindset to fit in and work here. I suspect, you know, that there's a work culture that, you know, that within, you know, WSR that is only going to be right for a lot, or some people, and obviously you guys, and, you know, fitting in with that sort of stuff. So it's and you know, working here, is it, you know, does it feel like, I mean, we all expect that working, you know, in racers feels exciting. Does it feel exciting even on a day-to-day sort of basis?
Do you know what? We probably all get complacent at times, but as a whole, I think we all enjoy what we do. We wouldn't be here. It's certainly a lifestyle choice rather than a career choice. So if you didn't enjoy it, I think you'd find it very hard. You know, there are long hours. There are times where things just aren't going your way, but you have to find a solution. And I think what brings everyone together is we find that solution as a team, and ultimately that solution then gets carried across all three cars. You know, we're here to get a job done, and it will be done to the right standard every time. And as long as everyone's on that same sort of mindset, you know, I think we're in a good place. So
I think might be a question for Ryan, I suppose. When it comes to a typical race weekend, you know, so just to give an idea about, I suppose, you know, we watch, you know, Sunday, sat at TV, watching ITV4, watch British Touring Club. It feels like a long day watching all of that. But I suspect for you guys, it's a much longer weekend. When do you start? When do you, when it comes to a race weekend, when are you thinking about it? Or actually sort of like actively sort of stop going to a race circuit?
So I would say the race weekend probably starts for us is the start of the week for the race weekend, where we'll set the cars up here on the patches you've seen over there. And then before that, we generally go and shake the cars down at a test track. Basically just go through everything, check the brakes are working fine, the gear ratios are correct, and there's nothing that's going to bite us when we get to the track.
So you're taking them to a separate test track. You're not taking them to the track immediately then. You're using a different test track to get the shakedown sorted then. Okay. And then so when do you turn up to the circuit?
Generally on the Thursday. So after we shake the cars down, we'll go to the track on the Thursday. Track's a little bit further away from here, like Knock Hill. We'll go up a day earlier. But generally we'll get the cars and the equipment out, and then on the Friday, everyone else from the team will come along and start setting up the garages for the weekend.
So and obviously over the weekend, if there's an unfortunate incident, possibly, obviously that's a lot of work for you guys. What is the sort of latest you've been working on a car on a Saturday night, or maybe even the morning of the Sunday of a race day? What's the latest? How close has it been to sort of like that start line before you've actually sort of got the car ready?
At a race weekend or just in general?
Any time,
I would say, well, for example, last season we had an incident on Tom's car at Alton Park, race one, where we got spun round coming out the last corner, and then we were hit twice quite heavily on the rear and on the left hand side. We sustained a lot of damage then, and we managed to get the car out for race 3. We didn't get out for race 2, unfortunately, but we managed to get the car out for race 3, you know, in a safe state to race. And Tom actually came from the back to 15th to get a point, so that was pretty good. But we didn't get the car back from the fabricators until 11 o'clock on the Tuesday evening. And we worked until 11 o'clock the next evening. And by that time it was loaded in the truck. So it was from, like Carl said earlier, the 24-hour ready. We got the car back. We were finished painting it at 2 a.m. And then we had the front subframes and everything built up, ready to go in. And by 4 or 5 p.m. we ran the car up, went through all the gears, we set it up, and it was on the truck by 11 o'clock that evening. So.
Fantastic. Great. Well, I think we've got to the end of our questions as well. It's been absolutely fascinating looking around everywhere. And thank you so much for letting us look as close as we can at the cars as well. I appreciate so much getting us access to these cars, and seeing all these bits. Even if we, and we didn't show any sort of like any secret bits as well, which is we were very conscious about that. Well, so yeah, we definitely don't want to ruin anything for you guys. So it's incredibly valuable sort of lesson. The privilege of being able to sort of like see these as close as we've been able to. It's just wonderful. So much for your time. Also, thank you for our sponsors, Machine Mart and storemycar.co.uk. It's been absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much for watching.